I love it. Crystal, always coming through with the jams. I just kind of broke up that one really good song that I do like, but we have to keep the show going and continue to give you all the amazing content that you, our viewers, deserve today. So we are super excited to bring to the stage our next panel on leadership in corporate America. Today's panel will be moderated by Burrell. He will be joined by Conrad Woody, Alex Dixon, David Clunie, and Rasan Cofield. No relation, although I'd love to know about that. We welcome them to the stage and look very much so forward to them joining us. Rasan, do we have any relation? Is your family from Louisiana?
My grandfather was a wild guy, so I don't
well, my grandmother was a good woman, so I know that
right. Cleared that up.
Oh man.
Well, gentlemen, enjoy your panel. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Natalie, and it's a pleasure to be with all of you today. I am excited. Again, my name is Burrell. And I am a coach, copywriter, and organization development consultant based in Washington, D.C. I also bear the distinction of being a proud graduate of the Mecca, the real HU Howard University. And so what I'd like to do now is I would like to introduce each of the panelists, of which I would like to also note that at 4 out of 5 of us are also alums of the great Howard University. So I'm really excited about that as well. First, we have David Clunie, who is the Executive Director of the Black Economic Alliance. Thank you so much for joining us, David. Next, we have Conrad Woody, Partner and Head of Odgers Berndtson's U.S. and Corporate Affairs Practice based here also in Washington, D.C., also where I'm located. And next, we have Rasan Cofield, Director of Investigations for Lockheed Martin Corporation. And last but certainly not least, we have Alex Dixon, the West Region President of the Pure Star Group. Hello and good morning, gentlemen. How's everybody doing today?
Morning. Good morning. Blessed and highly favored, brother. Good to be with you.
Right. Good to be with you all. Thank you so much for lending your time to this panel today. And thanks again so much, Walker's Legacy, for allowing us to talk about leadership in corporate America. I'm not going to hold you. I'm going to get right to it because we know time is worth more than money these days. So we just want to make sure we can do the most with what we have. So for the first question, I will say that I would like everybody to take about a minute to answer. I'm going to start with David, and then we'll go with Rasan, Alex, and Conrad, okay? So here's the first question. So for leadership in corporate America, how do people navigate in your respective industries? How do they make inroads, garner mentors, and also find resources, et cetera? What do you want to share that you think should be important?
So I'll say relationships, everything begins and ends with relationships. For me, I started my career as a corporate lawyer. So I went to the Howard University School of Law, started my career as a corporate lawyer, went into politics on the Obama campaign in 2008, clerked for a federal judge, went back to a law firm, worked at the White House, was an Obama appointee at the Treasury Department, went to JP Morgan Chase, and now I run a nonprofit. So I've been in public, private, nonprofit, and in every space, relationships have been key. And in fact, in my current job, I have had to call on relationships from every part of my past career. So I would say to people, always think about the impression you're leaving on people. Do a good job, work extremely hard, and think about your brand, not in a way that you're out marketing yourself. And we can talk about that later. You do have to do that, but more in a way that you want to leave a positive impression about folks so that 10 years down the road, 15 years down the road, and this is legitimately happening to me now, people can say, I worked with that person. In my case, he's a good dude. He works hard. He's about his business. And these things come back to you. So do yourself a favor and make sure they come back to you in a good way.
Thanks so much. Rasan, would you like to go next?
So I'll start and speak from the diversity and inclusion lens, which is the work that I'm doing now, because it is such a booming industry right now because of what's going on in the world, especially since the death of George Floyd, the murder of George Floyd. And it's very much a body of work that is driven by passion and heart. But what I can say is that although passion and heart will maybe get you through the day, you need to know what you're talking about. And for those of us who are, doing this and practitioners of this work, it's very important that you're not one of the people who are just showing up and saying, I'm really passionate about diversity and inclusion, let me throw this event. And you need to understand the ins and outs of Title VII. You need to understand the reason why we have certain affirmative action guidelines and the history behind it, because none of this diversity and inclusion work just came out of the air. It is based on the country and laws that we need to put in place to address some of the systemic failures of our government. So if you're going to do this kind of work, I encourage you to build your skill set, sharpen your axe around the foundational elements of diversity and inclusion.
All right, thank you so much. Let's move forward. Conrad, would you like to go next?
Sure. I'll come in from a headhunter perspective. You know, I think about 4 things. Number one, you have to be excellent. And if you take a pause to ask yourself if you're excellent, you probably have more work to do. So especially in this market, in this economy, in this new world that we're in, it's important for you to be excellent. I think number 2, be intentional about acquiring information. What I see in my line of work, Olu, is that there's a lot of inequity in information and opportunity. So if you design your life to acquire information that's valuable, you have more tools in the toolbox to make decisions. Third thing, be intentional about giving. So to David's point about relationship equity, the best way to build a path to relationships is giving. And my last point is show your work. You know, we're in an economy where we've lost the ability to meet. So you have to find ways, digital and otherwise, to let people know that you're excellent.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Let's move over to Alex. Alex, how would you respond to that question?
No, I appreciate the opportunity. One thing I'd point specifically in terms of navigating through, I think particularly for Black men who have the opportunity to go into some form of a professional services environment, whether that be banking, consulting, a legal profession, who then want to shift over into an operating entity. It has been helpful for me in my career to be able to point to, my time starting at Goldman Sachs and kind of the M&A group, because that helps to differentiate you and provides a lens at a macro level, so that by the time you do begin to try to navigate through a traditional corporate setting, there's some skill set that you're able to develop. And so, there's been a number of trailblazers in the gaming industry who I've followed, and many of them started out with a Deloitte, with an investment bank or kind of legal background, and then have matriculated through an operating entity. So I think for people who don't necessarily know what it is that they want to do, or you're still early stage in your career or even mid-career, I think it's worth focusing on seeing how you can leverage some form of professional services to help you transition through traditional corporate America.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. So if I were to summarize what I heard you all say, I would say be adaptable, know your work, show your work, and make sure you make those connections and make sure you know how to network properly. Thank you so much, gentlemen. Let's move right on to the next question. I'm going to start this one for you, David. So this next round, I'm calling this one is free, but the next one will cost you. All right. So the question I have is, what advice would you give to corporate America about what they're getting wrong about the recruitment, retention, and promotion of men of color? And I'll give each of you 2 minutes to respond. So we'll start with Dave, and then we'll kick it off down, and I'll pitch in to let you know who's next. Thank you.
Olu, I need about an hour to respond to this question properly, but
yes,
for the 2 minute answer.
yeah, absolutely.
The nutshell, they have to stop doing the same things and expecting different results. Going to the same sources and resources and expecting different results. And you can't fix what you can't measure. So one of the things companies need to do is start measuring what is the gap between what you pay your Black employees and your other employees. What is the gap between the criteria that's applied to your Black employees and others. And even the culture, there's this culture that you have to be absolutely perfect, extraordinary, articulate. You have to be Barack Obama essentially in order to be one of the few people who makes it above the fray, and you are the exception. And we will often hear things like, you're different, you're special. And we shouldn't have to be exceptional for Black folks to fit into the culture of an organization. So the question is really about, I think, identifying all of these companies, especially larger companies, are microcosms of the world and the communities they serve. That means racism exists. So stop asking the question, if racism shows up, ask the question, how and where systemic racism is showing up and how they operate. And I think in terms of recruiting and promoting Black talent, there's an article that I saw that identified 5 places that systemic racism shows up in companies, and it's in succession plans, in feedback, training and development, happy hour. That means the culture and who you're around, and then promotions. So if you don't have any Black folks in the pipeline, if you're not building a bench, and if there's one senior Black person and there's nobody coming behind them, you have a real problem. So that is my 2-minute answer. I'd love to talk about it for about another hour.
Oh man, we're gonna have to bring you back. We'll figure out how this works and bring you back, because I know the time will get away from us. But thank you so much for that answer. So I'm gonna go over to you, Rasan. So I know that as an equal employment opportunity and investigations executive, I'd love to hear your perspective on this issues, but from the diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging lens. So what is corporate America getting wrong, and what should they be paying more attention to again?
Yeah. And so at large, I think that corporate America is getting wrong is there's a few things. One is the assumption, to David's point, the assumption that we're not impacted by those stereotypes. And so having to be twice as good to be half as recognized, that we have, those of us, on this panel participating in this, is that we've ascended somehow, we're transcended in a way that doesn't make the things that happened to George Floyd impact us or weigh on us, and that we're one of the ones that wouldn't apply to. So that's one thing. The other thing is that, and especially with what I'll call the newer workforce is coming into out of college and recent graduates, they need to really recalibrate on their assumption that that new workforce is interested in a career in corporate America, because they are very much moving away and going into entrepreneurship as their goal career, or that they're going to have multiple experiences with different employers as opposed to a long-term career with any corporate entity. And that if they choose to or want to have that demographic of Black men, we're talking about Black men specifically, that the concept of belonging has to be real. And if belonging at your company means you need to assimilate, then it's not really belonging at all. So I'll say that. The last thing is that I think that corporations are missing the mark on is this a lack of understanding of how the laws that I talked about before have impacted this newer workforce. So they're coming out of college now. They've spent the majority of their collegiate career under the rules put in place by the Obama administration, which were very clear around setting expectations on behavior at work, around how people should be treated, at what things should and should not be happening to them. And so they're coming into the workforce, not allowing and not being accepting of people just going along to get along, or doing things to them that they know should not be done to them, right? And they're calling out that behavior, which is creating large shifts. And you'll have these kind of dynamics between the new workforce and the old guard coming in, and they're saying this green body of employees is coming in and pushing folks out. But what they're doing is actually calling them to task and saying, you can't treat me this way, and I won't stand for it. Your culture has to change. And they're asserting their rights.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that answer. So now I'm going to go to you, Alex. And I think this is one of the most important questions I think I can ask in this space. And so as Black men, it can sometimes be difficult to identify and own the privilege that we do in fact have. So what are ways that we can better use that privilege to create space and opportunity for Black women in corporate America?
No, it's a great question, and I appreciate that opportunity to respond. I asked one of my analyst colleagues when I was at Goldman Sachs, I said, hey, do you feel more out of place as a Black woman, or as a woman or a Black person? And her initial response was Black. But then she came back later to me and she said, you know what, it's actually being a woman. And Goldman, I was an analyst there from 03 to 06. So by that time, it had been very cosmopolitan, very forthright in terms of, at least at its undergraduate recruiting level, being very diverse. And so we all felt that there were some other people that we could point to. But as we saw throughout this matriculation, that it is different. And so post the George Floyd, I've had a number of calls from Fortune, CFOs, CEOs and chairmen of companies, white men who have engaged in a way that is just different from, let's say, after the Trayvon Martin. And so one of the ways that, just help to counsel, develop, and really develop a vocabulary particularly for white men, is to be able to say, hey, if I'm able to talk about my own privilege as a Black man, and how I need to be more conscious as a leader, as a developer, as someone who promotes, hires, coaches, people of all races, but in this case, women. Hopefully, through my development, it can be enabling for you, in many cases, white men, to help talk about their own privilege and help them to be able to showcase that, hey, I may have an internal bias both towards women, but then specifically towards Black women. And so I think we've been able, and I think hopefully develop relationships, across a broad spectrum of the United States. But specifically, in order to make advancements, white men who control a lot of these institutions have to be able to change. And we can either yell or we can kind of coach, counsel, and develop.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that answer. I think that's really important, everything that you just said. Wow, I think I wish we could spend another hour or two talking about these issues, but thank you so much for the time that you have given us. So I want to change gears just a little bit, and I want to talk about money. Right. So I think we can all agree it's a subject we don't often address to the point of specificity that perhaps these forums need. And I do want to acknowledge that we do have a panel talking about that a little bit later on. I do think it behooves us to have that discussion here as well while we're talking about leadership in corporate America. And so I want to move on to the headhunter extraordinaire himself, Conrad. So the question I have for you is, what salient point or points should we be making or paying attention to when it comes to salary negotiations, investments, and the like? Drop that knowledge on us, brother.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, as a headhunter, I'm fortunate to advise boards and CEOs on high-level recruitment strategies and retentions of their talent and workforce. But one thing that the byproduct of it, Olu, is I'm on the front row seat of inequity every day. And as I think of the mission of this conference to be able to help men accelerate, we got to be comfortable talking about money. I think number one is, again, the pursuit for information, right? I think a lot of times we assume our way into these conversations. I really counsel the men and the folks that are on this call to be able to develop deep relationships with the people that you know, and to be able to get uncomfortable talking to each other about money. Because the people that don't look like us, they talk about it all the time. What's the next thing that you do? You show up in the world and with a giving spirit to be able to identify opportunities where you can not only share, but also gain access to information, if that makes sense. And so as you're working within your professional network and you're building relationship and linkages, figuring out strategic ways over a long period of time to say, hey, I'm thinking about moving over to Deloitte. Do you know someone over there that can talk to me a little bit about compensation? Because at the end of the day, information is power. Thirdly, it's being comfortable with negotiating, especially when it comes to my Black women. I counsel Black women that I work with as candidates. Absolutely, you have to negotiate, but you have to negotiate from a principle of information and a principle of power. And the way you do that is how you show up before you even get a call for a deal. So thinking about how you can structure your life to continue to get information, to be able to effectively negotiate from a position of strength and not a position of fear. And I think lastly, Olu, it's being able to share information to be able to, with respect to what you're doing with your money, right? And so as you move up the ranks, you'll see, or I've been fortunate to see with respect to the clients and the candidates that I work with, they have really deep, intense conversations about what they're doing with their money. And I think it's no better time to start now. Obviously, this is a very difficult time in a pandemic, but just rethinking what that means to you and how you can put yourself in a position to acquire information with respect to investments, whether it be securities, equities, real estate, and getting in those spaces to be able to acquire that information to advance your life.
Yeah, thank you so much for those insights as well. I'm sitting here thinking about it, and I'm also realizing that we're actually about to get to the final question. We kind of breezed through that, and so we do have a little bit of time with this, and so I'm going to ask this last question. We have about 12 or 13 minutes left, and so I'm going to give you guys free reign to lay down this, to throw down the gauntlet on this one. So what we think about is the purpose of this Men Who Enterprise event is to help Black men navigate these current volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous times, otherwise known as VUCA, as it pertains to both their lives and their careers. So the question that I have for you is, what actionable piece of advice could and should each of us do today, October 30th, 2020? We can start doing it today in order to advance ourselves as it pertains to networking and advancing our career trajectory. I'm going to give each one of you brothers 3 minutes apiece. We're going to start back with you, Conrad, then we'll move to Alex, Rasan, and David. And if we have time, I'll weigh in myself. So Conrad, would you like to spin off?
You should weigh in yourself, Olu. You know, your advice and counsel is valuable. You know, what comes to my mind about actionable steps, Olu, is number one, inside baseball, right? So if you think about leadership in corporate America, a lot of times we go through life on autopilot and we're not strategic about how we use your time, talent, and resources to acquire the life that we need. So what does the inside baseball mean? Number one is spending time with yourself saying, what do I want to do in this world, right? What is my perfect world? And how do I assign a value to that? You know, in my perfect world, I would love to be a United States Senator or the general manager of the Tennessee Titans, right? So even though I'm a headhunter, there's definitely a way for me to get to both of those points because I know how to structure it, if you will, right? And so playing that inside baseball to really think about how can I create the relationships, acquire the information, and spend some time with me to talk about where I want to go in the world. If you want to be a CEO, if you want to be a CFO, or if you want to be a nonprofit leader, what does that look like? And who can you talk to get the information so you can make the best decisions on how to chart the path in your life? Secondly is the outside baseball, right? And what is the outside baseball? Number one is how you show up in the world, right? It's how are you treating people? Are you excellent at what you do? Are you creating the right networks? Are you creating the right relationships? And are you doing it with intention? Again, what did I start with this conversation? Sometimes we walk through life aimlessly, like, oh, we're just going to punch a card and we're going to do it. Unfortunately, in this market, we just don't have the luxury to do that, Olu. So you have to be really thoughtful about playing outside baseball. Is how are you showing up on LinkedIn? Are you sharing your wins? Are you developing thought leadership? Are you doing panels and things like that for people to understand who you are and what your value is? And furthermore to that, what are you giving? You know, the people that you want to get to know, the people that you want to develop relationships. You know, a lot of times like, hey, Conrad, can I have 30 minutes of your time? You know, sometimes yes, sometimes no, especially now. But have you really thought through what you can give? What value do you have to be able to help to share that over time and with intent to be able to develop those strong relationships over time? And so those are the two things I would counsel these brothers that are in this call that are actionable things that you can look in yourself and then you can look outside to be able to get the life that you want.
Okay, so Alex, you gotta top that.
Won't even attempt to. But I turn to economics, and so the core element of economics is supply and demand. And so much of our focus over the last really 20, 30 years in this space has been to create a greater supply of whether it's young Black executives, just Black executives, period. But I think we quickly need to shift to the demand side and being able to identify how there's a market opportunity for corporations to increase their bottom line by being able to hone in on a specific market. And so specifically, that means in our perch, wherever we sit, we need to be able to help to advocate for consumer-facing businesses to be able to clearly articulate how much of their revenues are generated from African-American communities. And so very tangible examples of how this has been successful and how we need to permeate that throughout corporate America. Number one would be the current presidential ticket. If you look and you think of Joe Biden, not getting political, as a representative of corporate America, when he tapped into a network of people by bringing Kamala Harris onto the ticket, I think what we're going to see in the postmortem of this election is to see how the corporation or the candidate, which is a corporation, was able to generate more top line revenue by tapping into the Black consumer. If you think of Marvel and Black Panther, and if you take that corollary across business, many businesses who are placing Black people on their boards today intuitively believe that a big portion of their consumer base is African-American and are giving a nod, which I'm so excited about. But we clearly need to be able to articulate in a planning and analysis way to be able to say, we can make more money if we approach the American marketplace in a different way. So if we take this same notion to housing starts, as we think of GDP in America, one of the leading indicators that we look for are new housing starts. So if we thought about on the demand side, if we were able to close the housing gap between Blacks and the rest of the market, what impact would that have on GDP? We would approach that differently from not just the HR component of our P&Ls of corporate America, but from the marketing component, and those dwarf HR budgets. So we have to create the demand in order to create opportunities. And so while we got to be focused on individual achievement and what we all can do, we have to start at a macro level within our planning and analysis departments to clearly articulate the demand to open up opportunities for us all.
Wow. Thank you. I feel like we're building something here. I want to go ahead and pivot to Rasan. Rasan, let's hear you weigh in, sir.
Yeah, so I'm going to go kind of on the micro level and be a little bit more tactical operating under the assumption that a lot of the folks that are joining in on the call are working at a company that are working in corporate America, perhaps, or any other employer. We have, and to the point we raised earlier, we have a history of being twice as good and receiving half the recognition. And sometimes that manifests in us being extremely disgruntled when we see people who are mediocre obtaining careers, positions, and promotions that we are otherwise qualified for. And maybe because they have that inside baseball, like Conrad mentioned, maybe they have the relationships, networks, maybe they have the golf memberships or things like that with the folks who are making those decisions, or maybe they look like them. And we don't. And regardless of what's on our criteria, on our resume, all the things that we've done, things we fulfilled, and what we have delivered, we're not really clear on what our next step is. So my actionable item for this group would be to make a demand and ask for a written plan from whoever your leadership is, whether that's in coordination with your HR business partner or whoever else that you might trust to give you valid information. What is your plan for me as an employee? Where do you see me going? What skills and opportunities and experiences do I need to have in order to progress in my career here? Have you valued me in the same way that you're valuing others? Asking questions about salary and getting a very concrete path towards development at your role. We get so upset when we see folks kind of slide into positions that we think we were really groomed for. And although that can happen for a variety of reasons, I deal with, kind of the uglier side of why that might happen in my daily work. And I have been doing that for some time. But the other part is, just very basically, you have not because you ask not, right? And so you have to really think and plan for what you're going to do and own your career and hold your employer accountable, because then that lets everybody know I'm ambitious. I have desires of upward mobility, and I'm going to hold you to account for making sure that I get there as long as I deliver on the commitments that I've made to you.
Amazing insights. Thank you. Thank you so much for that, David. I'm going to have you bring us home, sir. I can't wait to hear your perspective on this as well. Please.
So I agree with all of those points. The last thing I'll say is be proactive. Prioritize your own growth. We often talk about, if I had more time, I would do X. I would really like to find time to do Y. And in this new world we're living in, networking and professional development is even more challenging. Well, let's say there are challenges and opportunities. The challenges are you're not in person as much. So you can't, after this panel, catch Alex, Conrad, any of us and exchange cards and organically that interaction is not happening. But we also, I think, are in more places at once. So you have access to more people. And I learned this so I took this thing called the President's Leadership Workshop. It was a 6-month leadership workshop for people who were mid-level managers in the Obama administration and who wanted to get senior level management roles that were like Senate confirmed positions. And it was a phenomenal, President Obama called it Saturday School. It was something that he had gone through, I believe, at Harvard Law School, and wanted to have a leadership training development program so that people would leave his administration with skills that they could take wherever they went. One of the things that was a common theme among all of us, and we all came from different agencies, I was at the Treasury Department at the time, was that we all ran out of time. We all wanted to be more intentional with our time, and we wanted to be in more control and deliberately drive the direction of where we're spending our time. And we all make decisions about how we spend our time every day. Our calendars can be full, but the suggestion here is to put time on your calendar for professional development, whether that's reading a book, whether that's reaching out to, in my case, my relationships thing is absolutely key. So that is emailing people that you've been wanting to keep up with, reaching out to people that you've wanted to network with. Make time for your own development. And that means it will come at the expense of something else. But if you don't invest in yourself, nobody else is going to invest in you. So absolutely be proactive, prioritize yourself and your own growth, and make time for it. And it will absolutely pay dividends.
Absolutely. Thank you, gentlemen, so much. I am going to kind of jump in this a little bit. I feel like you all have touched on some very, really incredibly important points. I think from my perspective on this particular subject, as an executive coach, I often find myself working with clients around these questions. How can they be more impactful? What can they tangibly put into place? And as I start thinking about what would be most helpful, one of the things that I have people do as a homework assignment is I'll say, I need you to write a job description of everything you want to do in your job. I need a day-to-day, what that looks like. I need salary information. I need benefits. I need you to write down every single thing you want to do. Do not write down what you don't want to do, and be intentional about pursuing things that way. And that's to borrow what you said earlier, Conrad, about that inside baseball. We don't network correctly the way that we perhaps should. And we know that 80% of our success will come from 20% of our connections, which means we have to start mining the connections of people who we know, like, and trust, and start making those connections, warm up those connections if they've been a little strained by the time that we've been in for the last few months. And we need to be really intentional about what that looks like by taking control over what it is that we want, being very clear about that. And also, again, going back to inside baseball, examining our own beliefs about things that we are going to do, that we are capable of doing, because all of our behavior is informed by our belief system. And so if you don't like what's happening and what you're acting and enacting, I would encourage you to look at what it is that you believe. What are your belief systems? Do you have a growth mindset versus fixed mindset? That's a good book to read, Mindset by Carol S. Dweck. I could talk about this forever, as I know we all can, but I do want to be sensitive to your time. I want to thank you all so much for joining us. Let me be clear on that. So I'd like to thank Rasan, David, Alex, and Conrad so much for your invaluable insights and the gift of your perspectives. Thanks also to Walker's Legacy and their vision to widen the circumference of their impact by inviting and including Black men in their work. Our next panel, Financial Wealth Building and Planning, is coming up next, and you don't want to miss it. Please stay safe, healthy, and sane, everyone. Turning it back over to DJ C. Devone to keep us rocking throughout. Thanks, everyone. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for participating and for being here and dropping such gems